Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Nate. I also go by Hockey Boy Nate, and today we are going to be discussing potential Tropical Cyclone 3 and where it could impact, as well as how strong it could be as it heads closer and closer into the coastline of the US in the Gulf of Mexico, as well as a little bit of severe weather that will linger into the Ohio River Valley. But before we get started, I'd have to ask you all to take the time. Please do me a favor, hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Leave a like on the video so that way I can help spread this video out to people who may need it. That's what YouTube's algorithm does. It recommends it to people who may not know my channel for the first time, as well as share this with friends and family and on social media. That would also be greatly appreciated. I also have timestamps in the description down below for people who want to pick and choose to what specifically they want to see. So if they're not experiencing severe weather in the Ohio River Valley, then they could just zoom right over to this tropical system that we'll be talking about. But we will be talking about that severe weather threat here for portions of the Ohio River Valley. An enhanced risk has been issued for that general vicinity, as well as closer to the Mississippi River Valley. So places like Indianapolis, Columbus, Akron, Dayton, Canton, even places further towards Peoria almost, they could potentially see some damaging winds in upwards of hurricane force in some instances. But huge risk here within this 3 out of 5 on the severe weather scale. This dark green right here is a 1 out of 5, other known as a marginal. You have a couple marginal risks across the board here, with even one down south near where the tropical cyclone will most likely make landfall or have its outer bands to reach towards the coastline. But 1 out of 5 on the severe weather scale there indicated in dark green, and then a 2 out of 5 in that yellow right there, other known as a slight risk. If we take a look at the parameters here is the wind outlook. 5% indicated in brown, 15 in yellow, 30 indicated in red. So whatever probability you have, that is your chance of seeing 58 mile per hour winds or greater within a 25-mile radius. You also have this black circle with dotted lines in it, and that is indicative of a significant severe risk for very strong damaging hail. They do have some damaging hail, but not strong damaging hail. Strong damaging winds within that area. 10% chance or greater of seeing 74 mile per hour winds or greater, which is hurricane force. So definitely something that people need to continue to monitor as this continues to progress into the evening and overnight hours. And then we also have our tornado risk here. We have the 2% chance for tornadoes indicated in green, and then a 5% chance indicated in brown. So whatever probability you have, that is your chance of seeing a tornado within a 25-mile radius. Now, if we take a look at the temperatures here for Friday, across the board here in the United States, practically everyone is at least seeing 80-degree temperatures. You have some areas here in the Northwest that's seeing a little bit less. You have some areas here in the Northern Plains that are also seeing a little bit less. But for the most part, everyone in the United States is kind of feeling the summery conditions. And I'll tell you a place that does not want to feel it anymore. It's the West over here. I mean, they've been sitting in triple digits for quite some time, have not had a whole lot of rain. The monsoon has not come yet, and so they've been experiencing a very exceptional drought. You guys might be able to get some relief here relatively soon, though. Well, not exactly relatively soon, but soon, as in I can see it within the next week. So definitely something that we're going to have to watch out for as this continues to move on through. And then for the most part, everyone else in these kind of brownish areas are in the 90s, except for this bright white into black. Like places in Kansas, they could be experiencing conditions in upwards of triple digits as well. Now, let's take a look at the simulated reflectivity. This will be giving us basically a simulated version of the radar. So it kind of forecasts where these storms are going to be and what all is happening. So already we can see these little lines of storms that'll continue to move on through at around 11 to 12. But that was the lingering severe weather threat from last night that was heading through Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, into Illinois. So that will eventually die out there into the early afternoon hours. But then by 3 o'clock Central, 4 o'clock Eastern, there's some initiation here within central portions of Indiana into northwestern portions of Ohio. a little bit to the south and west of Toledo, and that will eventually evolve into a giant cluster of cells, more or less, that will then turn into a very large line segment that will produce some very strong damaging winds across the board. You also have some lingering showers over here near Canton and south of Cleveland, and that could potentially create your tornado threat. But other areas here, this could be a very damaging wind threat that could try to unfold here. And you can even see these little bowing characteristics right within here and right within here. That's indicative of a lot of strong winds surging in behind all that rain. And so if it was like a regular line of storm, if you can imagine the winds surging in behind it, it kind of arcs a little bit further if you focus it on a specific spot. So that's exactly what we're seeing here. Pretty strong bowing segments heading into places like Cincinnati a little bit before 9 p.m. Central Daylight Time, 10 p.m. Eastern. And as that continues to unfold and progress, that line will eventually deteriorate. But you do have some more thunderstorms here that begin to form. Actually, it forms along a giant line as well, but it's not exactly a consolidated line. So this is more of a broken line quasi-linear convective system, or QLCS. And so areas here along the border of Iowa and Missouri, as well as places in central Illinois into southern portions of Indiana, they could be seeing some more damaging winds from this system. Another line of storms that will really kind of fire off. But then once you get into the early morning hours on Saturday, that's when this really starts to deteriorate and your threat for severe weather will start to shrink in a bit. Now we're going to take a look at the maximum wind gust swath here. This will basically give us an idea as to how high winds could get up to. So wind gusts is a good way to look at that. And we have some instances where in these areas we have these greens, even oranges and reds. That indicates 40 mile per hour, well, 30 to 40 mile per hour winds or higher. Some of these reds indicate 50s to 60s, and the maximum we see here on this frame is actually 68 miles per hour. So that is definitely above severe weather capabilities. Not exactly to that hurricane force strength standard that we were talking about earlier, but according to this model, it does say it could get up to 70 miles per hour. It is definitely possible. All right, we're going to briefly talk about the day 2 outlook here for Saturday. Massive 1 out of 5 on the severe weather scale here, indicated as a marginal in this dark green vicinity here. So one is for the tropical cyclone that will make landfall. Another one is for the Central Plains. And then another one is for the Ohio River Valley into the northeast, where that massive cold front will basically move on through and create some interesting conditions. All right, now let's quickly take a look at Radar Omega here. We'll be able to see satellite, track, all sorts of stuff. It's a nice program that I like to use. It also shows radar and stuff like that, but we got all sorts of stuff to look at. We're going to take a look at the satellite imagery here, the infrared satellite imagery, and we can already see those leftover thunderstorms that are actually pushing on through into northern Indiana and northern Ohio with all of these high top storms. The darker the clouds are, or the darker the colors here, except for this blue means higher, but the darker the colors, the higher the thunderstorms are, because what infrared is basically telling us is it's showing the tops of the thunderstorms and how cold they actually are, because the higher you get in the atmosphere, the colder it typically gets. And so by looking at how cold it is in the atmosphere, we can basically correlate to that as to how high these thunderstorms actually are. So typically, if you do see this red and this blue and stuff like that, that shows you that it's pretty high up in the atmosphere. So we got those thunderstorms moving on through into Fort Wayne and Toledo. Pretty interesting with that. We also have some more storms, or some more clouds that are forming down here in Des Moines and Davenport, and that could potentially, progress further on as a severe weather threat. But if we move down south, we actually have our tropical threat right here, and two interesting things to talk about. So first things first, we're going to talk about this new tropical depression over here that is in the Pacific. And this is Tropical Depression 4E. It has 35 mile per hour wind sustained. Max wind gust is 45 miles per hour, moving west northwest, crawling west northwest actually, and the minimum pressure is 1,005 millibars. We can see the track here as it heads closer and closer into Mexico. Expected to make landfall somewhere near the Jalisco areas, and then that'll continue to move on through up the western coast of Mexico into the Durango areas. And so the interesting thing about this is that if this system continues to gather up a lot of moisture here from the areas of Central America, like Guatemala and stuff like that, to try and intensify this storm, the moisture could potentially ride up with this tropical system. And you can see this tropical system is starting to head off into the general vicinity of the southwest. And so if this thing can continue to surge on through with this moisture, we could potentially see some relief down here for areas that really do need it, that are in a very exceptional drought. So it's something that we're definitely going to have to watch out for within the coming days. But this tropical system is expected to intensify further as it gets closer and closer to the coast, with wind speeds in upwards of 65 miles per hour. I would not be surprised if this intensifies higher than that, maybe even into a hurricane, due to the fact of how the conditions are very ripe in that area. But just had someone at my door. Just had to see. But the conditions over in that general vicinity are really good for a tropical system, and so we'll have to definitely keep an eye out for that, especially for people who are in the southwest. But that was Tropical Depression 4E right there. Now, if we take a look at potential Tropical Cyclone 3 over here, this has maximum sustained winds of 35 miles per hour, wind gusts of 45, moving north with a minimum low pressure of 1,007 millibars. The hurricane hunters just recently sent out one of their planes to go investigate the system, which is pretty interesting. You can see their track here through the actual convection with all of this thunderstorm activity right in here. And so really interesting to say the least. And actually, we have a better way to look at this. If we go over to our trusty Google Earth, we can actually see how this thing has been tracking all the way through with the wind barbs and all that such. So I'm reacting to this data live, and we might as well see what's up. So just by looking at this, we've got a lot of westerlies right here, a lot of winds moving out of the west, and then winds moving out of the east right here. And so we do have a little bit of broad rotation right here at the surface, according to the hurricane hunters, but nothing all too interesting, to say the least, because it is pretty calm right here, and then it picks up again. And so it's not exactly fine-tuned to where the winds are all moving in the same direction at the same speeds, but they are still trying to figure out where the center area of low pressure is to begin with. And once they find that, once they find some sort of low-level circulation that will develop with more thunderstorms, then we'll potentially see as to how we could track this out and what the intensity is further on later. So as I said, there's potential Tropical Cyclone 3. I mentioned before that it was at maximum sustained wind of 35 miles per hour. The National Hurricane Center does believe that this thing will intensify into a tropical storm. That would be Tropical Storm Claudette. And so Claudette will potentially impact places near Morgan City, the intercoastal city areas near Grand Isle there, as a tropical storm. And that'll be pretty interesting to see, as well as the fact that the National Hurricane Center has also went ahead and has issued multiple tropical storm warnings from the Vermilion Bay areas all the way over into places near Pensacola. And so a lot of activity expected here. Tropical storm conditions are expected with this system as this heads further on to the north, and they actually believe that it will intensify into a 45 mile per hour storm rather than just a borderline 40 mile per hour storm. I would tend to agree with this, maybe a little bit stronger if it does get its act together a little bit better. But as of right now, this thing is expected to become a tropical storm, and that's one thing that we are really going to have to talk about as this gets closer and closer. Then here's Tropical Depression 4E. There is a couple tropical storm watches here along the coast of Mexico for this thing to potentially intensify further, but it is a little bit later on, so not expected to hit almost immediately, but around Saturday evening into Sunday morning, that's when you can anticipate this system to really move on through. And the National Hurricane Center, as I said, does believe that this thing could intensify into a 65-mile-per-hour storm. I would not be surprised if it was higher than that, but that is still something to look at. Here's the satellite imagery for a potential tropical cyclone 3. You can see a lot of deep convection here from the infrared satellite. As I said, the darker the colors, the higher the thunderstorms are, and we are seeing a lot of those blacks and whites over right in the center of those reds. Very deep convection or thunderstorm activity is ongoing here, and there's even more thunderstorms that are occurring off to the south. And so how this progresses, how this bands together with most of these thunderstorms, we will really have to see. But this is really a lot of activity that is surging into this system. And if this does start to rotate a bit, like it is trying to do so now, if we actually play the loop again, let's actually go back here. You can see these clouds over here move a bit more south and west, whereas these other clouds move to the north and east. And so if we play the loop again, you can see there's already broad rotation here, broad spin in the atmosphere. They just need to, in order for this to be a tropical system, it needs to be a lot more consolidated. So this is a still disorganized system that is trying to form, but as of right now, it's looking promising with how much thunderstorm activity is here with this. Let's take a look at the water vapor imagery here from the satellite, and we can see a bunch of things with this. First things first, we're going to take a look here with all this black space here, more or less. The darker the colors, the drier the air there is. And there's a lot of dry air right within this general vicinity of Texas and northern Louisiana. So we can expect this to play a factor with this storm's characteristics. And I am anticipating that this storm will most likely have a lot of its activity on the northern or eastern side of the actual tropical system, even southeastern side. If we were to separate this into quadrants here, then basically what will happen is there will be rain on the northeastern side, the southeastern side, northwestern side, a little bit of rain, so just a little bit of rain, and then not any rain at the southwestern side at all, due to the fact that the dry air, once this tropical system moves up further north, it'll be encountering that dry air, and that dry air will basically wrap around towards the rear of it, create less thunderstorms, because tropical systems tend to like a lot of moisture in order for it to create its own thunderstorm activity. But because there's a lot of dry air there, it'll basically be clearing up a little bit, and so we can anticipate that to not be a whole this to be a very organized tropical system here in the month of June. But really interesting to say the least. We can also see the wind shear and how it's been moving through here. It's been displacing most of the thunderstorms and clouds away from this tropical system for quite some time. And you can even see, to compare and contrast, watch how fast these clouds are moving compared to these clouds up here. So we'll play the GIF again, and you can see these clouds up here at the north and east are moving a lot faster than these storms to the south and west. And so a lot of strong wind shear up there in the southeastern portions of the United States, and that's going to be a contributing factor to this tropical system, as well as to whether or not this thing could gather thunderstorms, get it around the center area of low pressure, and see how this thing will continue to progress and evolve further. Because if there's wind shear there, it could displace the thunderstorms, and it could make this a little bit more of an unorganized tropical system. All right, let's take a look at the GFS spaghetti models here. This is an ensemble guidance that will be able to tell us as to around where this thing could potentially make landfall. And according to the GFS, this actually says it'll most likely make landfall right around the Vermilion Bay areas, maybe a little bit further west. But the GFS typically loves to make landfalls a lot further west than it actually is. But we'll definitely have to continue to watch it as it continues to move about. Anything is possible with this tropical system as it moves on through, and even if it moves a little bit further west, it could create a lot larger impacts for places that really don't need it, more or less. But then we also have the Euro model here, and the Euro model is a lot more convinced that this tropical system will basically hit somewhere from Venice all the way over to the Vermilion Bay areas. It's very consolidated, very tight cone of uncertainty here. Even though there really isn't a whole lot of uncertainty, it really does believe that it will make landfall in the state of Louisiana before it will move off across Mississippi, Alabama, into Georgia, the Carolinas, and out to sea again. So really interesting to say the least with the Euro. And then if we take a look at the multi-spaghetti model guidance here, you can see a lot of these other models here really think that this will also make landfall here in Louisiana as well and take a very similar track as the Euro. So definitely something to say with that. If we also take a look at the intensity guidance here with this system, with all these different models, you can see quite a few actually breach the tropical storm threshold. This little dotted line right here is the indicator of whether it's a tropical depression or a tropical storm anywhere within the green. And a lot of these models think that it will get into that threshold. There's even one that thinks it could get upwards of 60 miles per hour, 65 miles per hour. I don't believe that it will be the case. I think it's going to be relatively consistent at 45 or 50 miles per hour. I think 45 is a safe bet, but I would not be surprised if it was 50. And then there's a couple other models that think it'll be below that. But for the most part, the models do think it's going to be at least a borderline tropical storm as it continues to move about. All right, so let's take a look at the HWRF simulated radar here. The HWRF does tend to overdo a whole lot of its activity, but whenever it does track out tropical systems for landfalls, it typically does a really good job. So we're going to be looking at that. If you want to take a look at the timings up at the top right hand corner, that's all the information you need for you all. And so let's just go on through here. This is the early morning hours here for Friday for this tropical system, and you can see this really starts to kind of consolidate over the next 6 to 10 hours here. And as this gets closer and closer to the coast of Louisiana, you can already see these little swirls that are trying to get into the actual tropical system. And so really interesting to say the least with this as to how this thing will really start to organize. But you also notice that here's the center area of low pressure. And if we go back to that quadrant thing that I was talking about, to where we separate it in these quadrants, you can see that most of the activity is either on the northern side or the eastern side. The western side, there isn't really a whole lot because you have that strong wind shear that's pushing these thunderstorms away. You have that dry air that's seeping around and it is not is basically prohibiting more thunderstorms to form. So that's what I'm talking about with how there's going to be a lot more activity here on the eastern side of the tropical system, and this could spell a lot of flooding here for places east of that, especially in places near New Orleans, Biloxi, Mobile, on top of the storm surge that is expected over here as well. But you can even see as this gets closer into the Friday evening, look at that rain. Look at that rain. Look at these bands that are swirling in from this system right in there. That is what I'm talking about with all that rain that'll be surging into this. And it'll continue to linger even after the tropical system makes landfall from Friday evening into Saturday. According to the HWRF model, if we go back a slide, you can see that it actually thinks it makes landfall right around midnight, maybe a little bit past midnight here, across portions near Morgan City. So really interesting that we're going to have to watch out for. I'm not sure if I'm going to be live streaming the landfall. I probably will, but this will be like an exception because this is the first tropical system to make landfall here in the United States for the Atlantic hurricane season of 2021. But regardless, still, there's a lot of rain that's basically present with this tropical system. And as it continues to get closer and closer, well, actually, I should say further and further away from land. A lot more rain starts to consolidate here within these bands out in front of this, and this will basically be creating even more of a flooding risk as well as a tornado threat across those future bands. But then we're really going to have to watch out for this as this heads on further and further towards the Carolinas and places like Georgia, where there could be more rain expected with these systems on Sunday. Now let's take a look at the Euro and the GFS surface wind guidance here. So we're going to be taking a look at these coastal impacts here for the most part. And so what's really interesting with this is that these models here actually think that the landfall is going to happen at around the same time. Even though it's in different places, we still can have a general idea as to what's happening. So there's a scale there, the color scale for people who are curious. And as this continues to progress, you can see how this really starts to kind of ramp up. The Euro actually is a lot more intense with the winds here as this gets closer and closer towards places like Venice here tonight into tomorrow. And then as this continues to move about, that's when you can see a lot more damaging winds into places near the Mississippi River Delta as well as Lake Pontchartrain. And then as this continues to get closer and closer to midnight, you can even see the general swirl right within here with all the surging winds from that line of storms right within there. And same thing right here too as well. So you can see the little center area of low pressure, the little eye, if you will, right within here. But this is what I was talking about, where most of the activity is going to be on the eastern side. If you look at the western side, there isn't really a whole lot of damaging winds over there. A lot of straight line winds, not a whole lot. But on the eastern side right here, notice how expansive this wind risk across the board is. So if you live within these areas here, from coastal Louisiana all the way over to coastal panhandle of Florida, you guys could potentially see some tropical storm force winds and even higher gusts within some of those areas. And it's pretty interesting to say the least, because on Saturday morning, that's when winds also start to kind of uptick a bit into Saturday afternoon. You can see, according to the GFS, some really strong winds surging on through into places like Mobile and Pensacola, and even the same thing for Euro, except on a lower scale. So really interesting to say the least, and we could potentially see some higher storm surge amounts, probably in upwards of 2 to 3 feet in some of these areas. And so definitely something we're going to have to watch out for as this continues to progress. But then as this gets further and further into Saturday evening into Sunday, that's when this really starts to kind of deteriorate. You still have some strong winds here along the coast, but they would be probably sustained 10 to 15, maybe even 20 miles per hour in some spots. So you'll just have to deal with some more conditions from this tropical system even after it leaves completely. So if we take a look at the GIF here, you can see that is actually about the same. They make landfall at around the same area, kinda. And then as it continues to move on through, then the winds aren't as strong. But the few key points that I'm mentioning here, as I've said, is that most of the activity is going to be on the northern or eastern side of it. You're also going to get some storm surge from this. And some interesting notes here is that the highest miles per hour wind speed for sustained winds that I found on these models were the GFS having 45 miles per hour and the Euro, actually GFS having 46 miles per hour and the Euro having 42 miles per hour. So really interesting with this as this makes landfall here, or it is at least anticipated to make landfall there at around midnight tonight into tomorrow. So now if we take a look at the total rain accumulation for 6 hours, this is the GFS, and the GFS is really intense with the amount of rain that's falling over these areas. This is just one single frame, which is just so happened to be the highest amount of rain falling within 6 hours, or the rain rate, I should say. No, this is 6 hour total rain, 6 hour total accumulation. And you can see some areas here around Biloxi, north and east of Louisiana, even to east of Louisiana, you have rainfall amounts in upwards of 7.5 inches in a 6-hour span. I mean, that is a lot of rain, and on top of all the storm surge that'll be surging on through, you'll have that much rain, that much more flooding within some of those areas, and so definitely something we're going to have to watch out for. And then here's the Euro, not as intense, but 4.5 inches of rain for a 6-hour time period in some places near, say, Laurel, Mississippi, and south of Laurel, Mississippi, as well as areas near Mobile, Alabama. And further extending, we have some other areas with some lesser amounts of precipitation. But from yellow and onward, that's an inch of rain or more. And I can fully expect that you guys could see that much rain within some of these areas. So here's the Weather Prediction Center's total rain accumulation outlook here. The light greens are 1 to 2 inches. Dark green is 2 to 4. Yellow is 4 to 6. Orange is 6 to 10, and then we have some of these reds here over the water that is 10 to 15 inches. But the whole thing here is that areas near Mobile, Biloxi, even New Orleans get 4 to 10 inches of rain within that general vicinity. On top of that, I know I didn't show this here for you all. I'll actually put this up here real quickly. On top of all that rain, you also could see an absorbent amount of storm surge with this. I mean, take a look at that. Some areas here from Vermilion Bay all the way over around the Mississippi River Delta over towards Mobile Bay and further on towards the Okaloosa-Walton County line. 2 to 3 feet of storm surge is expected with this system. And even from Cameron to Intracoastal City, 1 to 2 feet of storm surge is possible. Lake Pontchartrain, 1 to 2 feet is also possible. And then areas near Panama City could potentially see 1 to 2 feet of storm surge with this as well. So you'll have an upwards of 10 inches of rain on top of the storm surge with this in some of these areas, and upwards of 2 to 3 feet. And that could cause some really intense flooding in some of these areas along the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. So definitely something we're going to have to watch out for as this continues to move on through. I'll be able to update you guys in depth as to what all is happening later on tonight. It'll be a much longer video. Typically I upload shorter videos in the beginning of the day, longer videos at the end of the day, but I'll be updating you guys in full later on tonight. When this thing does start to move on through, unless if I'm live streaming, then I'll be updating you guys there. So what are my final thoughts with this? Well, let's take a look at my tropical cyclone landfall outlook, and I haven't changed anything since last night. I still have the possible around areas where I think a landfall is possible, but I also have this dark red area here where where I think it's most realistic as to where this tropical system will make landfall. And so I definitely think that it could be somewhere here from Cameron all the way over to the Mississippi River Delta, maybe a little bit further west of the Mississippi River Delta. And it will most likely be somewhere here near Morgan City. That's where I'm thinking. But as this continues to unfold later on tonight, I'll show you guys a new graphic and a new category for where I think the actual tropical system will make landfall specifically. So that's going to be pretty much it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you did like the video, please be sure to leave a like. Subscribe if you're new. Turn on notifications to stay up to date with all my content. Share this with friends and family and on social media. Also follow me on social medias. Link in the description down below. My name is Nate. I also go by Hockey Boy Nate. I will catch you guys later on tonight. So peace out, everyone.